I am a member of the Naranon organization, and I am also a recovering addict. And I have multiple decades clean in recovery. Sometimes that's a hesitation for me to share, and probably people would say, well, why the heck would you hesitate? But because in our program, it's central to NA that we focus on just for today. And as we become more acquainted with the 12-step programs, wherever we are, whether we're codependents, our addiction is our addicts. And so we enter into recovery every bit as much as our addict, whether it's our children, a spouse, partner, fiancés, employers, extended family, you name it, we've had those people come into the rooms. So you need to approach coming as your recovery, because in Naranon we come to take care of and heal ourselves. Most of us walk into the room thinking, I'm going to get the answers, all the solutions are going to come to me, and I'm going to be able to get my son or my daughter or my wife or my husband fixed. And then it doesn't take too long before you realize that what you're really here for is about yourselves. It's about self-care. So I actually wrote a few notes down because I was nervous enough that I wanted to have something to start with. And I intend to share some things about my life as we go along. But I'd like to share a couple of things with you. The first thing that I started with is addiction. Addiction is a family disease. And on the cover of this, I just have a few members of my family that are impacted or have impacted me about the disease of addiction. And so, let's see, up at the top here. And this is not about embarrassing my family, and many of these members of my family are deceased. So I have my grandmother, who was quite an accomplished manager back in the 40s. She was a manager of a bank as a woman, extraordinarily accomplished, a first generation from another country. And later in her life, she broke her back more than once. She became a prescription pain medication addict and also an alcoholic. And then I have my grandfather, who was a big band singer, and he was gifted, and I love to tell this story. I wonder what my life would look like today, because he and Frank Sinatra were living in Hoboken. The two of them were competing, and in every contest, he would always win over the audition. But unfortunately, he was already at that time a severe alcoholic. And so he lost his career, although he never lost his voice. And he died a tragic death with emphysema, lung cancer. He and my grandmother divorced, and they both went on to have some very difficult marriages, and the children that came from both of their second marriages all have some form of addiction. Then I have my mom and dad, and my mom was very often dragging us, especially me, because I'm the oldest of 7 children in the household. And when my grandmother became this terrible addict with the prescription medications, a lot of terrible things were happening in the home. It would be 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and my grandfather would call my mother, and we would have to travel often. It could be an hour and a half at night. And so I saw as a little child things that little children shouldn't see. While my mother and father, probably about the time I was 6 years old, did not drink for an additional 30 years from that point, they're definitely the generations and the abuses and the dysfunctions of addiction were well ingrained in our lives. My mother and I, my mother's a terrific genealogist, we've gone back on one side of the family and probably have counted 7 generations alone on one Scandinavian side of the family that we had, verbal traditions have been passed down through the grandmothers sitting and talking about what their lives were like in the old country. So my personal opinion in my experiences is that there's definitely a genetic factor, and I believe that addiction is a disease and that there's a predisposition to it, but I also believe there's an extremely conditional contribution to it, and we learn that by the patterns that we're all experiencing. And so I know I came to these rooms as a mother, I was hysterical, out of control, maniacal in everybody's face, demanding. I came to City of Angels, New Jersey. Now this is me who had become an underground addict. I was no longer an addict, but I had all of my addict behaviors. And it was probably 2 or 3 years after my son was born that I stopped attending AA meetings. There was not a lot of NA meetings at that time in my life anywhere near me, so I had started out with AA. But I was so full of guilt and shame that I went underground. And I was raised in a pretty strict religious tradition. And I'm going to mention my faith because, we all have different backgrounds. And I was raised in the Mormon faith, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. One of the things that we're raised with is a great attention to honoring what is called the word of wisdom, which is not smoking tobacco or drinking caffeinated beverages, not drinking alcohol, a good emphasis on your health and nutrition. Everything was about family, and so I was raised in a goodly home in the picture-perfect sense of what was going on. A goodly home. We attended church services regularly. My mother was devoted to all kinds of things, and as children, we were involved with all of those things. So if you were to look at my family years ago, you would have seen on the outside what looked like a picture-perfect family. Industrious. Sometimes people make jokes with me and say, when were you raised in the 1850s? Because we had 5-gallon containers of wheat, 1,500-pound containers of wheat. We had hand-milled, my mother and I, ground wheat. We made 12 loaves of bread that were like this big every 2 weeks. We planted a 1/4-acre vegetable garden wherever we lived. Because my father was in the Marines, we moved often, and then later on his second vocation had us traveling. And so a lot of times we were moving every 9 months or a year. So planting gardens, harvesting, canning fruits and vegetables, picking berries, picking fruits out of the trees. My mother sewed all of our clothing. It was an industrious household, and again, everything on the outside looked picture perfect. So what happened to me, and what happens to a lot of addicts, is somewhere along the line things happen to us, and we tend to take all that stuff and we stuff it down. Things happen. And I shouldn't say that it happens to everybody, because I know people who were raised in great households and became addicts because they just went out and started to do the experimentation or got involved in college, events, fraternities, and things like that. And all of a sudden one day they decided, they didn't have a switch, they couldn't turn off. Their friends could, they grew up, they matured, and they went on in life. But in my case, there were a lot of underlying issues, and I think it's extremely important because as parents and as families, we don't want to believe that things happen to our children, especially things that we didn't know about. It tends to bring on other kind of shame. I think parents have this expectation. Our intuition is we're going to fight for our children. We're going to give them the best of the next generation. They're going to get to have the things we didn't have. We compensate for what we might not have had. And so kids get messages along the way, and we start to silence some things. So that's something that started to happen to me. Even though I was in this goodly home that looked picture perfect, there were things going on, and I wasn't allowed to talk about them. Nor did I feel, and nor have I spoken to my parents yet about some of these traumatizing issues that happened. One of the traditions that's so incredibly important about our 12 steps is giving back. And so I'm going to read just this little bit that I put together to share, to get my mind a little bit focused. And how much time do I have? Can I just ask?
Yeah, go on, sorry. We'll be here till 8:30.
Okay, great. Roll up your sleeves and get your notebooks. So today, I was thinking of all of us, and I remember the journey as I first walked through the door. I had been through a 12-step program, not one but two. I'd also gone to ACOA, which was Adult Children of Alcoholics. And Melody Beatty, or Beatty, depending on how you say it, had written Codependent Memoir. And so this was kind of revolutionary at that time. Good, Bill Giovanetti's showing you the books. He's got them for sale this evening. Grab one. And I'm sorry, I lost my place on that. That's okay. So as I was starting to say, I was thinking about, what brought me into the rooms. I knew about addiction. I had friends that had experimented with LSD. I had friends that had died from shooting up speed. I had friends that had died from heroin overdoses. It was also a generation of time in my life where it was before the AIDS epidemic had been defined. I had a lot of gay friends and a lot of gay male friends that were dying. And in the culture of the gay culture, the men particularly, crystal methamphetamine was a drug that was used as a party drug. Today, something that would be relative to that would be ecstasy. So it's, drug use isn't a new thing. It's got new terminology, and I will say it's pandemic. It's not just epidemic, but it's pandemic. So the clubs were, booming at the time that I was coming into my young adulthood. And I had secrets, and I was looking for answers, and I wanted to break free of these secrets that I had. So for me, I also had a tremendous amount of stress and pressure on me. So I knew better. And when my son first started to exhibit problems, and my son had cancer at the end of high school. My son was an all-star track, football, basketball athlete. He had pending college scholarships on the table, won state championships twice. And at the end of his high school experience, he was diagnosed with cancer. And so he was introduced, besides the casual experimentation with the ecstasy and marijuana, he was introduced to opiates and became addicted through his cancer. And then he was introduced to OxyContin. And then after he came off the OxyContin, he couldn't afford the OxyContin on the street, and he then resulted in the heroin addiction. And that's how I started to come to Naranon. I started taking my son to NA meetings because I knew that's what he needed. And I'm dragging him forcefully. In the midst of all of my hysterical enabling, I'm going to fix him. I can cure his addiction. I know it better than everybody else, right? And shortly after I started taking him, I realized, what was I doing? And I came into the Naranon rooms. Actually, Bill, which I don't even know if you remember, Bill answered the phone call. I called the 800 number, and I spent an hour and a half on the telephone, and Bill was my first contact with Naranon. And after that, I felt like something had just lifted, and I got myself into, I think the first meeting that I went to, the first meeting that I went to was the Saturday meeting over at St. Mark's Church over on Paxson Avenue. And while I was sitting in there, there was another couple who was part of our Naranon family who talked about this guy, this angel guy, or this guy, something about City of Angels or something. And so Paul and Gina started to talk about this person who would come into their lives and about these really kind of amazing things that were happening over here in Hamilton. And I remembered the name Paul, and I remembered something about angels or City of Angels. And it was quite a little bit of time later on in one of the episodes where my son had tried to commit suicide by taking a number of drugs and had disappeared into the woods. I called a friend of mine who lived in Arizona, 3 hours time difference, and I said, get on the internet. I need you to find me this person. I don't know why, there's all kinds of other resources around, but my girlfriend came up with Paul's telephone number, the City of Angels organization, and a half an hour later, there was a person on the phone and a contact, and that's where my son's intervention began. And I like to say it's where my intervention restarted for myself. So I always wonder, what is it that's brought each one of us into the rooms? And I've heard many parents share around this table, and each of us has a unique story. But we're not unique. We're all suffering. We're all here because someone that we love is close to our hearts, and we don't know what to do anymore. There's another book I'd like to reference. I don't have it here tonight. I have another one of hers. Her name's Debbie Ford. But before I talk a little bit about her book, and I'm going to read an excerpt to you of that, one of the things that I love about being in recovery and in the Narranon rooms is it allows me personally the freedom to explore parts of myself that I have tried to hide or deny. And I think as we reflect in our meetings and we share our insights, things that we've learned with one another, I have heard a constant theme, which Debbie Ford talks about in her book. She says, we have this perception, there's something wrong with me. I'm not okay. I'm not lovable. I'm not deserving. I'm not worthy. So whether we're codependents learning about our own need for the recovery process or the addict, we all seem to share a common theme, a feeling of shame and guilt, and a responsibility, a sense of responsibility for things that we later learn through these programs that are not ours. Some of us have traveled further than others by the time that we get here in our healing towards wholeness. And then our recovery programs provide us with a perfect guide, utilizing the 12 steps. And in Debbie's book, it's called Dark Side of Light Chasers. She talks about our need to confront our shadows. So for me, and I'm being selfish because when I come to Narranon, it's about stepping away from myself, and it's about stepping into my own healing. So this process here, and I am so grateful for the privilege, and I cannot tell you, it's such a privilege for me to be here. But it is for me, and I'm so grateful that you're giving me this gift, because in the process of sharing with all of you, it provides a completely different experience than the self-work that I do alone, or even with my therapists, and I've had a few through the years. And it's really important, and I wanted to acknowledge the difference that all of you make in my life. And each one of you that ever sits there hesitant or shaky or feels like you can't talk at the time, when you do, or I see someone struggling, it makes me dig down deeper, and I feel inspired by the sharing and just your presence to peel back some of those layers of myself. So as you become willingly vulnerable and bare your souls, I experience the humility that comes from those true teaching moments. And my own judgments towards myself are softened, and I'm able to approach myself with more gentleness and patience. I think a lot of these books that I've got here, Toxic Parents, Healing the Shame That Binds You, things like we've heard about John Bradshaw. When you have a lot of abuses or you grow up with dysfunction, things have happened to you that distort your perception of reality, and you don't think that you're worthy. And I'm so harsh, and I'm so condemning, and so judgmental. And when I sit here and I listen and I feel the weight, the combined weight of the negative energy, the things that we're holding inside of ourselves, they're killing us. I know it's made me very ill. I think that my illness is probably more from all of the stresses that I've been carrying all of these years and the actual neurological disease that I've acquired. So each of you are responsible for giving these gifts to each other and to me. And I thank you for leading me by your examples, because long before I could have ever been able to stand up here and share my experiences, I was a wreck. I was a completely frenetic, neurotic wreck. And I couldn't do what I do today if it hadn't been for, almost 3 years of doing this. Something else that I also learned in recovery work, and it's in this particular book. Did I bring Perfect Daughters? Perfect Daughters is a book written by Dr. Robert Ackerman, and it's written from the perspective of women raised in alcoholic families. But scratch out alcoholic, put in codependent, put in dysfunctional. It doesn't matter, because the experiences of what you go through. I hope I brought the one thing I wanted to bring. And bear with me for 1 second, because I have a list of something that is kind of says a lot. There's a list of qualities that I'm trying to get to here. I have them all in a nice little bookmark that I made, but of course I left it behind. Okay, well, it's in here. I might find it for you later if you come and talk to me, because what I find is I come up against a lot of resistance with parents and addicts. So engaging in the work of individual recovery, it allows us to own the qualities that belong to us. So we're starting to step out of denial. And the thing is that we've developed many qualities to overcome all of the challenges that the addictions environments placed us in. And I want to emphasize that. And I wrote it a second time because this is how important it is. We come to recognize in this program that we developed qualities to overcome the challenges that the addictions environments placed before us. In other words, hard as it is to believe, there are amazing skill sets laced into what we traditionally view as horrible experiences. So I continue to invite, and I don't know who the newcomers are, but we always ask, come back, come 6 times, give it a chance, check out the other meetings, check out other people. Come along, join with us in the 12-step recovery rooms, and give yourself and your minds a chance to filter through the principles and the examples of sharing. And we say in our SESH book, which stands for Sharing, Experience, Strength, and Hope, S-E-S-H. You'll hear people in there refer to it as the SESH book. Let's reveal the power and the freedom that comes as we step out of hiding and reveal ourselves to the rest of the world. And this has been probably the single greatest challenge that I've faced in my life, was stepping outside. As a matter of fact, I think it really has everything to do with why I was so nervous to come and speak here this evening. I've spoken in many other places extemporaneously, but the City of Angels is home to me. It's where I began this process. And when I first came, I never mentioned that I was in recovery. I was still living in denial and the shame. I had migrated into that perfect church lady. I served with the children, I served with the teenagers, I went to the girls' camps, I was dealing with the shut-ins. I probably was in church service 6 out of 7 days a week. And I tried to adapt and put on the front of what a good mother looked like. And when I came in here about my son's problems. It caused problems, repercussions down the road later on. And I talked to my son this evening, and I said, give me 3 things. If you could, give me 3 things that I could contribute to other parents about what made this journey so difficult for you. And so this is what he shared with me. He said, my son never knew his father, and I never shared the details of that experience. It was very traumatic. There were things I didn't want to deal with. And he had come to me, and it has been his lifelong struggle, not knowing his father, not knowing the details and the circumstances. And it caused him to tunnel down into these places and become something in his mind. Which children do they fantasize? They want to think of their fathers as someone who died overseas on a ship. I didn't find out until he was in his adulthood that he had frequently told his closer friends these stories, these fantasies. And so I can't imagine the sadness, the longing, the sense of worthlessness, that he wasn't wanted, the shame, because society's really hard about being a child in an illegitimate relationship, and especially not knowing the details. So that was one of the things that my son said that would be very helpful for me to share in our healing together. And as parents, if you could look into your hearts a little bit, and maybe for my amends to my son, I have to work on that process of giving him those things that he asks of me, and own up to the fact that I did that. And I was so angry and still hurt and stuck in my own, I didn't resolve those things as a child. There's a wonderful small book, it's called Outgrowing the Pain. It's a small read, it's got little pictures in it, and talks about once a victim, always a victim. Adults abuse as children struggle with the question, will I ever recover? Will I ever lead a normal life? They may feel hopeless about making lasting changes, finding their positive resolutions fizzle out quickly. These adults may feel damaged for life, but as mentioned previously, changes can occur, they take time. It's important to be patient with yourself, take credit for your progress. So here I am, a mother of a 28-year-old heroin addict, and I've gone back into not only did an Aranon program, but I've gone back to NA, and I started all over again, just like we tell the kids how imperative it is with a sponsor, with my own sponsor. So I have a sponsor that I'm working with in Aranon, because it's a different accountability for myself. But I found that there were issues that were so deep and so unresolved that were far more important for me to go back and take on working on myself. I can't lead by example for anyone else. You can't fake this disease. You have to walk the talk. My son also said that my being a workaholic was really hard on him. I was a single mother, trying to do everything I possibly could, sometimes working 3, 4, 5 jobs. I managed to secure a couple of good jobs with a future, and it resulted on my son being home alone. And that's when he told me that he really started to entertain himself or seek to fill that emptiness and that aching. And even though I thought I had everything handled, I didn't think he was so much a latchkey, but he really was. There was a time when I thought, at the age of 14 and 15, I thought he was okay to be alone for, the hour and a half or 2 or 3 hours after school, but he wasn't. And then the other thing that we discussed that he said was really critical is that I had taught him a set of values. I'd raised him up in a system of values that was all about family, honoring your family, honesty, trust, building relationships, taking care of yourself and your body. And here I was the biggest hypocrite. And so for him, he began to detach from those values. And then when I told him, he asked me multiple times in high school if I had ever done drugs. And I said, I smoked marijuana. I never discussed with my son my addictions. I never discussed with him my suicide attempts, and I never discussed sexual abuse or the other things which are very personal parts of my recovery. And I think I was so afraid to keep that lid on Pandora's box that instead of thinking really about the welfare of my son, I was unwilling to pry open and answer him with directness. And in today's society, with what our kids are facing in school from a very young age, so this is my son saying, Mom, share these 3 things. Don't keep secrets. Secrets make us sick, which is something that we learn in the Rosemary here. And he also said to me, when you did answer my questions, you glossed over them. And I didn't think that I was glossing over his questions about drugs, because he was asking me about drugs. I wasn't telling him I was using them. But I realize now, I was so uncomfortable about it that I probably did. I just probably, it's like when the kids ask us about the birds and the bees. Okay, on the next page. Sometimes, not for everybody, but that kind of a thing. I was uncomfortable, and it caused him some harm. So I want to share what Debbie Ford writes about the power and freedom which come as we step out of hiding. So for me, being here in this building and outing myself and coming to terms with loving and accepting who I am today, which I also happen to be gay, and I only came out to my friends in my church, my religious faith, and people in my neighborhood this past year. As a matter of fact, it was in December. I'm going to be 51 years old very shortly. And that's how devastating, dark, and shameful and hurtful I felt about myself. And so for me, it's powerful for me to share that. It might make other people uncomfortable, and I don't mean to cause anyone discomfort, but I will tell you that a lot of our kids have experienced sexual abuses. They're experimenting with their sexuality. They don't know where to turn when they're going through these things, and they have feelings of shame, and so they hide. And so if I can, by putting myself out there, and really, it's really funny because I'm Mormon and I'm gay, so that doesn't sound like it goes together at all. But what I found was my friends came to me and they accepted me and they embraced me because they see the life that I live now, and it has nothing to do with, and the reason I share it again is if I can help one child, one person that's struggling to live, because they can come and talk to me, or you can call me and ask questions about how to guide them through that. I want to be that resource in the community, so I'm a stand for that. And that's why I share it. I don't share it to embarrass or to flaunt anything. So again, discovering the power and the freedom which comes as we step out of hiding and we reveal ourselves to the rest of the world. This is what 12-step work is all about. So as I read this quote from Debbie Ford's book, I want you to insert in those places confronting the shadows as doing the step work. Quoting her, we become free to experience our glorious totality, the good and the bad, the dark and the light, and it is by embracing all of who we are that we earn the freedom to choose what we do in this world. Most of us set out on the path to personal growth because at some point the burden of our pain becomes too much to bear. Everybody in this room probably nodding their heads. The pain has become too difficult to bear. We don't know where to turn. Here we are in Naranon. The dark side of the light chasers is about unmasking that aspect of ourselves which destroys our relationships, kills our spirit, and keeps us from fulfilling our dreams. This is a spiritual program. It's not a religious program, but it is about finding spirituality. And so I'm speaking from both Naranon and NA, and that's different. But we've got to get to a place where we can explore what spirituality is when we haven't had it. It's what keeps us from fulfilling our dreams, and it is what psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow. It contains all the parts of ourselves that we have tried to hide or deny. It contains all those dark aspects that we believe are not acceptable to our families or our friends, most importantly ourselves, and it is stuffed deeply within our consciousness, hidden from ourselves and others. And again, as we start coming into Naranon, we're focused on our kids, but as we peel back the layers of those onions, we find out our own secrets and our own shadows and our own behaviors. So the message that we get from this hidden place is simple. There's something wrong with me. I'm not okay. I'm not lovable. I'm not deserving. I'm not worthy. Simply put, we all have a dark side. And if we deny our dark side, it will cast a shadow that will negatively impact our lives. And in her book, I substituted the word. Our 12 steps teach us how to confront these shadows. You can achieve harmony and let your own light shine through by owning every aspect of yourself. She said, owning means to acknowledge that a quality belongs to us. And then the perfect daughters, there's a whole list of qualities that we developed by dealing with our addictions, whether things were being done to us or things that we went through in the process of being out on the streets, picking up drugs, putting ourselves in a position where frequently young women will sell their bodies for drugs, whether it's hanging out in bars with men so they can buy us drinks, or whether it's feeling empty and lonely. And I know in my case, I thought I was broken. I thought there was something horribly wrong with me, and you know that I needed to get drunk and do all kinds of drugs, and that any man would find a minute to take some time with me, you know, that somehow, you know, that was going to fix me, because everybody told me all I needed was the right man. And so I took that to heart. And when you're sick and you really don't like yourself, you'll do anything because you're dying, you're desperate. You want to get rid of that pain. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to grow up and be married and have 6 kids and a job. I was one of those rare ones coming into that time. She goes on to explain, the purpose of doing shadow work is to become whole. It's to end our suffering, to stop hiding ourselves from ourselves. Once we do this, we can stop hiding ourselves from the rest of the world. And I insert, the purpose of doing step work is to become whole. By facing these aspects of ourselves, we become free to experience again that glorious totality, the good and the bad, the dark and the light, and embrace all of who we are. And we earn the freedom to choose what we do in this world. We have choice. We have choice to deal with our children a certain way. We have choice to deal with our addictions every single day, just for today. So as long as we keep hiding, masquerading, and projecting what is inside of us, we have no freedom to be and no freedom to choose. And I rate this. In all of the 12-step recovery programs, we learn that we don't have to project our negative thinking onto the present, thereby guaranteeing a negative future. We learn how to let go and let God, or higher power, guide us by stopping that inner chaos, being still, practicing how to listen. I have learned, I needed the constant chatter, the constant fear, the turmoil that was going in my mind. Where is he at? Is the drug dealer going to throw another brick through my parents' window with a death threat? You know, where's the car? The car's disappeared. The friend's jewelry, the neighbors, you know, all that turmoil and chaos. So higher power guides us by stopping the inner chaos, being still, practicing learning how to listen. I needed to sit in here with my Naranon family. I needed to sit with my AA family and my NA family. I had to sit still. And it took me at least 4 months before my chatter stopped long enough that I could start to hear just the helping. When we read the Little Blue Book in Naranon, it talks about helping versus enabling. That's one of the first things that I remember when my mind started to quiet down. It stops the inner chaos, being still, practicing how to listen, at first to others in these rooms, then our spouses, our family members, our community, and especially our addicts. This is what we mean in step 12, having had a spiritual awakening. As a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And one of the things I have to say is this program is giving me my life back. I have had a lot of tragedy in my life. When I was very young, I was an accomplished pianist. By the time I was 14, it was pretty much asserted that I was going to be a concert pianist. And I had played at Carnegie Hall at 17, and that was the last time that I played professionally. My brother and sister were killed in a horrible accident, which also took my father into 3 years of constructive surgeries. We had family businesses. My parents had desperately worked to get into their own business, purchased a property. We're in the middle of buying an amusement park, because my father ran some of the large amusement parks in the United States, and he and a business partner bought an amusement park together, and that was just getting started. And all of these things happened, and that same year I lost 8 primary family members, died. When I did try to go pick up pieces of my life and started out to go to school, my college roommate, who was blind diabetic, died in a diabetic coma. That period of time in my life was just insane, and the grief, I never got to deal with that grief. But I had overcome my substance abuse at that point. But what happened to me was I never did the work from 17 to that period of like 21. I had secretly been drinking. I was the oldest. I had graduated from high school as a junior. It was my responsibility to take care of the children. A lot of what you read in things like Perfect Daughters or Toxic Parents, you'll realize that we took on a lot of responsibilities that weren't our own. And we had concepts through messages that were given to us about our own worth. And so my day started off at 6 o'clock in the morning with a pint of scotch, downing it. And I was so busy because I would take care of the kids and getting them dressed, doing laundry, packing lunches, getting them to school. My parents were both working. And there was no way in the world that I was going to let that facade of being that perfect family. Nobody knew that I was drinking. And then nobody knew that until, and there's something else that we say in NA. One of our things that we say, talk about jails, institutions, and death. And when I talk to the kids in NA, I say, mine started out the other way. Mine started out with death, institutions, and I managed to avoid jail. So I had several suicide attempts from a lot of the stress that had started to come into my life. I started to go to New York City, and I was meeting people. I was trying to deal. During the middle of the night, I was working all day, taking care of the kids, working all day, going out at night, trying to find who I was. And I was doing drugs to try to quench my pain. And I ended up, trying to take my life. And so I ended up, before I was 18, I ended up in an institution and had to deal with going into psychiatry, and really still wasn't prepared to take on a lot of that stuff. I think the thing that put me, I'm very lucky, and I know that a lot of the kids don't have this. I had a profound experience. The last time that I attempted to kill myself was the last time that I ever attempted to kill myself. There's no explanation why I'm alive, because of the manner, and I don't like to go into the war stories of things, but the circumstances were such that there was no coming back from this. You know, I plunged to the bottom of a mountain in a car, and I should not be here. And I walked out of my car, and I only spent 10 days in the hospital. But during that experience, I saw everything in my life. I saw some things on the other side of this life. I also saw the people who took their lives with suicide or left in great turmoil of having things that were unresolved in their life, that they suffered on the other side, and that they suffered the repercussions of the pain that they caused the people that they love. Now again, this is my personal spiritual experience. This is for me, but I can only share with you what that had a profound effect on me, because I was confronted immediately with, there's nothing I can do to stop my pain. I can't stop my pain with the alcohol. I can't stop my pain with the drugs. And I can't even kill myself and stop the pain, because on the other side I could see these other people in that place and what was going on, and they were just very devastated because their families were suffering, and they felt that pain. And I also was given the perspective of seeing that that pain was magnified far greater than what we even feel here. I was also told that my life was preserved for a purpose. I wish that the Lord had granted me what that purpose was going to be, but it's been a lifelong mystery to me. And so it wasn't until these past almost 3 years of my son's addiction that I finally came to realize that all of those terrible things that I went through have been a blessing. That my son's addiction, well, I wish I'd give my life if I could have avoided having my son go through the experiences. My son has died and been resuscitated 3 times. So in essence, 3 times I've experienced the death of my son. I would do anything to take that from my son. But the experiences that I have gathered, the sexual abuse, the physical violence, the tremendous, tragic losses, the losses of my dreams and everything that I had prepared for, and in even throwing myself into a spiritual way of life and a spiritual practice, I thought that I was only as good as what I could do. And you'll hear this a lot in recovery. The only self-worth that I had no self-esteem. The only self-worth I ever had was whatever I could do that day. So I lived and I was addicted to service, just like I was a workaholic. I had to prove that I was good enough. And right after I went through that experience, shortly thereafter, so my brother and sister were killed. And I just was like, oh, God, why not me? I didn't deserve to live. And you took my little brother and sister that were 10 and 12 years old. Why not me? They were going to make something of their lives. That was a mess. That was my thinking. So I now see, and I volunteer in recovery, and almost every story that the kids can share somewhere in my life, I've experienced it. And I have developed compassion, and I have developed empathy. And I have one of my little quotes that I have here in the front. And you can see I brought it here. Love is patient, love is kind, it always protects, it always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres, love never fails. And I love the commandment in the Christian tradition of love one another. And one of my favorite poets is George Eliot, who happens to be a woman. Don't be fooled by the name, just in case you don't know it. What do we live for if not to make life less difficult for each other? And so out of all of these things that I talked about that are horrible have come the greatest blessings, the greatest joys of my life. The best, the dearest, the most trusted friends I have are addicts in recovery, families of addicts in recovery. And when I look into the eyes of people now, I don't have judgment. I see, I don't profess to see as God sees, but I don't see the girl who's prostituted herself. I don't see the boy who's been in prison for repeated robberies or violent behavior. I don't see people who have sold their souls and would give anything to undo the mistakes and the tragedies of their lives. When I sit with them and I spend time with them, I am filled with love, and I see that there's no one is disposable. And so that is what my gift of recovery has brought to me. And I've taken up so much time, and I don't want to go past what you would like me to go. Again, feel free to look at these. This is something that I've learned more recently. I've read so many things all my life. This is by the Dalai Lama. The more you are motivated by love, the more fearless and free your actions will be. I think I have been so hung up on fear. Fear in my relationships. I came into this organization and I had a big ego, and I didn't even realize how big my ego was. And my ego got in the way, and when you're an addict and you want everything to be your way, and we'll do anything in the world to manipulate having our way. It's just like built into our subconscious. But the big truth for me was that I was afraid. I was still afraid, ashamed, guilty. I was afraid that I wasn't lovable. I was afraid people weren't going to like me. And another part of addiction is you become certain kinds of personality types. I became a caretaker. I became a people pleaser. Again, my life had no justification unless I could prove by some good thing that I did that day. That was my justification for taking up air on the planet. But this one thing, realizing that almost everything that I have a problem with, a confrontation, when I get into an argument with Bill, but if I were to get into an argument with Bill, I now know that whatever that confrontation is coming up for me is from some kind of fear. It has nothing to do with Bill. Because, and this is one of the books that I did bring. I love this gal. Byron Katie. She came up with this whole way of living. And it really challenges everything about how you look at your relationships. But I'm just going to read this little part. I've come to see that there's no such thing as criticism. There are only observations. And there is no observation that does not enlighten me if my mind is open to it. The 12 steps teach us that we must become open-minded. What could anyone say to me that I couldn't agree with? If someone tells me I'm a terrible person, I go inside myself. And in 2 seconds I can find where in my life I've been a terrible person. It doesn't make or take much searching. And if someone says I'm a wonderful person, I can easily now find that too. This is about self-realization, not about right or wrong. It's about freedom. The things that we do from fear, and why this has so much power for me, this is really one of the greatest things that I think I've discovered. And so it's making it easier for me to go into, we have to take a moral, inventory of ourselves, a fearless inventory. And we really have to look at what it is that we've done to hurt other people, or what other people have done to hurt us. And I really have struggled with that for so long. But this key that's unlocking my ability to just look at myself honestly and not have to pack all that around anymore, it's that whole thing about fear, and it's part of surrendering ourselves and letting go of, whether to higher power or just letting go of all this stuff that we've packed around forever.
You're doing wonderful. We have to give some time for the people to speak. Because that comes in,
And that was pretty much
what
I wanted to
appreciate
wrap with.
that you're doing, seriously.
So, and the last thing I wanted to say was, recovery is like a warm, fuzzy blanket.
That's good.
And it's wonderful. Wrap yourselves
I like
up
that.
in it. Okay. Thank you so much for letting me be here.